For 500 cycles, the Axiom Consortium had known only peace, a serene and sterile tranquility purchased with the blood of a forgotten war and maintained by the gospel of mutual prosperity. It was a union not of swords and crowns, but of contracts and commerce, governed by a council of founding species from a capital moon named Viridia, a jewel of terraform perfection. Every citizen, from the insectoid Cathar miners on the metallic worlds of the Rim to the ethereal Lumani scholars in the core, understood the bargain contribute to the whole, and the whole shall provide. History was a closed ledger, its debt settled, its accounts balanced. The official narrative, taught in every educational spire and broadcast on every public comm was a simple and soothing one. Long ago, a species known as the geodes, crystalline beings of unpredictable nature, had threatened the nascent stability of the galaxy with a virulent biological plague, a blight that warped life itself. With heavy hearts, the founding fathers of the Axiom had enacted the Great Quarantine, a sorrowful but necessary act of cosmic surgery to save the many from the sickness of the few. The geodes and their contaminated worlds were cordoned off, left to the silence of history, a tragic footnote in the glorious rise of the consortium. It was a story no one questioned because there was no one left to offer a different version. In the heart of Viridia, within the colossal data spires of the Imperial Archives, a junior chronologist named Lyra served this narrative with devout diligence. She was a product of the Axiom's success, her mind sharp, her loyalty absolute, her ambition channeled into the meticulous curation of the past. She spent her days cross-referencing trade manifests from defunct systems and authenticating third-cycle colonial charters, her work a testament to the order and clarity the consortium had brought to a once chaotic galaxy. She believed in the Axiom story as she believed in the gravity that held her to the floor. For to doubt it was to doubt the very foundation of her world. The lie was so complete, so perfectly constructed, that it had become the truth. The first sign that the truth had a life of its own appeared not on some distant, pirate-infested fringe, but in the very heart of the Empire. It came without a warning, without a sound, a violation of physics that was as elegant as it was terrifying. A ship, if it could be called such, materialized in the high orbit of Viridia, directly above the monument of Concord, the 100-kilometer-tall spire that celebrated the end of the geode conflict. It was a vessel unlike any in the consortium's extensive registry, a sliver of absolute blackness that did not reflect light but seemed to devour it, its edges indistinct, as if it were a wound torn in the fabric of space. It did not hail. It did not deploy weapons. It did not respond to the frantic challenges of the Viridian Defense Fleet, which scrambled to form a cautious perimeter around the anomaly. The ship simply hung there, a silent, obsidian teardrop against the brilliant swirl of the capital's manufactured atmosphere. Then, it began to sing. It was not a transmission in any known language or protocol. It was a broadcast of pure, structured sound, a signal that flooded every open channel on the moon and its surrounding system. The sound was a lament, a melody of profound and crushing sorrow composed of resonant, chiming frequencies that seemed to vibrate in the very bones of those who heard it. It was a funeral dirge for 1 billion souls, an aria of loss so potent that across Viridia, citizens stopped in the gilded streets and sterile plazas, looking up at the sky with a sense of unease they could not name. Accompanying the sound was a single, stable holographic projection, beamed from the dark ship with impossible clarity. It was not a threat or a symbol of power. It was the image of a geode child, its small form composed of soft, glowing amethyst, its multifaceted eyes staring out into the void with an expression of placid innocence. The Consortium Council convened in emergency session. Their public response, a carefully managed balm of dismissal. It was a hoax, they declared Passeid, a sophisticated act of terrorism by anti-Axiom dissidents, designed to incite fear and disrupt the upcoming Concordance Day celebrations. The defense fleet was ordered to contain and disable the vessel, but their efforts were met with confounding failure. Tractor beams slipped from its hull as if it were coated in oil. Kinetic rounds passed through its form with no effect, revealing its image to flicker for a nanosecond, like a glitch in reality. The dark ship was not entirely there, a ghost haunting the doorstep of the Empire, its mournful song in the image of the lost child its only message. The performance was not for the public, not truly. It was a key, waiting for the right hand to turn it in the right lock. Lyra was sequestered with the Consortium's finest minds in a crisis analysis chamber deep beneath the archives. The air was thick with the scent of ozone and intellectual panic. Xenolinguists, quantum physicists, and military strategists argued in circles, their collective genius failing to penetrate the mystery of the ghost ship. The haunting audio signal played on a continuous loop in the chamber, its sorrowful cadence a constant, unnerving presence. While the others debated propulsion systems and energy signatures, Lyra found herself mesmerized by the sound itself. The others heard noise, a psychological weapon. She heard language. She heard structure. With each repetition, she perceived a complex mathematical framework hidden beneath the layers of harmonic grief, a syntax of sorrow. It was a pattern that spoke not of chaos, but of deliberate, painstaking design, ignoring the dismissive glare of her superior. Director Valerius, a man whose imagination had long ago been calcified by bureaucracy, Lyra isolated the core frequencies of the transmission. She had a theory, one born of a scholar's intuition. This signal was not an alien message intended to be translated in the conventional sense. Its target was not a person, but a system, on a private console, shielded from the view of Valerius. She began running the signal's core algorithm against the Consortium's own internal security protocols. She was a chronologist, not a cryptographer, and her security clearance was several levels too low for the deep archive indexes she was attempting to access. But the ghost ship's lament was more than a song. It was a master key, a string of code wrapped in melody, designed to resonate with and unlock the most ancient, forgotten security measures of the Consortium's own network. She felt a subtle click in the system, a digital tumbler falling into place. A pathway opened, not to an external file, but to a sealed section of her own archives. A data stratum so heavily encrypted and buried that it didn't officially exist. Valerius strode past her station, his voice dripping with condescension. "Junior chronologist, I trust you are not wasting state resources pursuing your melodic fancies. The official designation is Auditory Agitator 7. Treat it as such." Lyra quickly masked her screen, her heart pounding. "Of course, Director. Merely collating public response metrics." He nodded, satisfied, and moved on, oblivious. The key had worked. The door was open. All she had to do was step through it, driven by a compulsion that felt like a betrayal of her entire life's purpose. Lyra remained in the analysis chamber long after the senior staff had retired to their quarters for the designated rest cycle. The ghost ship remained in orbit, its silent vigil a constant pressure on the capital. The song had ceased, but the silence it left behind was somehow heavier, more expectant. In the quiet hum of the deserted chamber, Lyra navigated back to the hidden directory. It was labeled with a simple and sterile designation, Biocontingency 734 Alpha Geode. The official record stated that all data from the quarantine was sealed for planetary security to prevent any risk of resurgent contamination. But this was something different. This was not sealed. It was buried, erased, intended to be forgotten forever. Her fingers trembled as she activated the final decryption sequence using the ship's melodic key. The layers of code peeled back like fossilized skin, revealing the raw data beneath. The first file that unspooled was not a text document or a strategic summary. It was a helmet cam recording, raw and unedited. Its timestamp dating back over 500 cycles. The perspective was jarring. The view that of a consortium marine marching in perfect formation. She saw the iconic white and gold armor of her Axiom's founders, not as ceremonial relics in a museum, but as functional tools of war. They were marching through a city that defied imagination, a landscape of towering, crystalline structures that sang with internal light. This was a geode world, but it was not the dying, plague-ridden wasteland described in the history books. It was vibrant, beautiful, and alive. She heard the chiming, melodic speech of the geodes, but it was not the sound of aggression. It was the sound of pleading, of confusion. The recording's audio captured the calm, detached voice of the squad's commander issuing orders. Hold formation. Marry targets are the resonant spires. Their energy production is the source of the contagion. Neutralize all active biosignatures. Standard containment protocols. But Lyra saw no contagion. She saw crystalline beings raising their multifaceted limbs not in attack, but in a gesture of surrender, of peace. Then, she saw the massacre. Plasma fire, clean and efficient, turned the glowing crystalline bodies to superheated dust. The beautiful spires were shattered by explosive charges, their internal light extinguished with brutal finality. The helmet cam swung to show a fellow Marine dragging a small than amethyst-colored geode, the same child from the hologram, away from its parent. It's silent, crystalline tears catching the light of the burning city. The file ended with the commander's voice, clear and cold. He surveyed the devastation. Central Command, Sector Gamma is sterilized. Leave no crystal standing. Leave no echo behind. Lyra recoiled from the screen. A choked gasp caught in her throat. Her world, her history, her truth, it was all a lie. A grand, beautiful structure built upon a foundation of genocide. As the weight of this revelation crushed down upon her, aboard the dark ship in the silent cold of space, a single console that had been dormant for half a millennium flickered to life. A pale blue light illuminated a single word etched in an archaic script. It read, Listener. Kalen, the last echo, felt a tremor of something he hadn't experienced in centuries. It was not hope, not yet. It was a beginning. His long vigil was over. The first seed of truth had found fertile ground. The silence that followed the final frame of the recording was more violent than any explosion. It rushed into Lyra's lungs, stealing the air. A vacuum of absolute horror that left her gasping. Her hands flew to her mouth to stifle a scream that was already dead in her throat. The Axiom, the benevolent, logical, commerce-driven consortium that had defined her existence, was a monument built on a mountain of crystalline dust that had once been living, breathing people. The Great Quarantine wasn't a mercy mission, it was an extermination, and the sterile, white and gold armor of the founders wasn't a symbol of order, it was the uniform of executioners. She stared at the frozen image on her screen, the commander's impassive helmet reflecting the fires of a dying world, and felt the foundations of her reality crumble into ash. For a dizzying moment, the floor of the analysis chamber seemed to tilt, the steady hum of the life support system sounding like the distant, mocking laughter of the dead. Panic, cold and sharp, seized her. She had to erase it. She had to close the file, scrub the access logs, and pretend this wound in history had never been opened. Her fingers slick with sweat, scrambled across her console's interface. She purged the temporary cache, triple-deleted the access pathway, and initiated a low-level diagnostic sweep of her terminal to overwrite any residual data fragments. Every keystroke was a betrayal, a second murder of the truth she had just unearthed. As she worked, a new, more terrifying thought took root the ship, the ghost in their orbit. It hadn't sent a message, it had sent a key. It knew. It had waited for someone, anyone, to turn that key and look inside the locked room of the past. It had found her. The thought sent a jolt of ice through her veins. She wasn't just a witness, she was a contact. She forced herself to breathe, to regulate her heartbeat, mimicking the calm she had felt her entire life but could no longer access. She smoothed her uniform, arranged her data slate on her desk with meticulous precision, and reactivated the public comm feed on her main screen, letting the official narrative of normalcy wash over her. It was a flimsy shield, but it was all she had. When Director Valerius returned with the morning shift, he found her exactly as he had left her, diligently collating response metrics. He gave her a cursory glance, his eyes lingering for a fraction of a second longer than usual. "You look unwell, junior chronologist," he stated, not with concern, Kate, but with the dry observation of a man noticing a flicker in a light fixture. "A long cycle. Director's Lazal," Lyra replied, her voice a marvel of controlled composure. "The auditory agitator is persistent." Valerius grunted, already turning his attention to the main tactical display where the obsidian ship still hung. A perfect, silent accusation. "Persistence will be met with purpose," he announced to the assembled staff. "High Counselor Thrax has authorized a Level 2 interdiction. The Viridian fleet will establish a hard perimeter. Any attempt by the vessel to alter its position or broadcast again will be met with decisive force." It was a lie, and Lyra knew it. They couldn't touch the ship. Their force was useless. This was posturing for the public, a show of strength to mask their utter helplessness. The real work was being done elsewhere. A new figure entered the chamber, his presence shifting the room's atmosphere from one of anxious debate to one of cold, quiet authority. He was Prefect Thorn, the head of Axiom Internal Security, a gaunt, severe-looking man whose uniform was a stark, unadorned black, a stark contrast to the ceremonial golds and whites of the administration. He moved with a predator's economy of motion, his pale eyes sweeping across the room and seeming to miss nothing. He conferred with Valerius in a low voice, but Lyra could see his gaze drift to her terminal, to her, for a moment that felt like an eternity. The system was now hunting for the source of its disturbance, and she was sitting at ground zero. Over the next few days, Viridia held its breath. The consortium's propaganda machine went into overdrive, painting the ghost ship as a prelude to invasion. Its sorrowful song a psychotronic weapon designed to weaken their resolve. The image of the geode child was branded a symbol of alien deception, a tool to prey on their compassion. Public sentiment, once merely uneasy, began to curdle into fear and anger. For Lyra, the world had become a waking nightmare. Every conversation was layered with hidden meaning. Every official announcement, a carefully constructed lie she was now intimately familiar with. She performed her duties with robotic perfection, her mind a fortress of feigned normalcy. But the truth was a living thing inside her, a shard of crystal grinding against her soul. She would see the helmet cam footage in her sleep, the silent screams of the geodes echoing in the hollows of her dreams. It was during one of these sleepless nights, while reviewing supposedly benign third-cycle shipping manifests, that the first true contact was made. A line of text in the manifest, A list of processed minerals from a long-dead mining colony. Flickered. For a single pulse of the screen, the alphanumeric code vanished, replaced by a single, shimmering word in the same archaic script she had seen on Kaylin's console listener. She blinked, and it was gone. The list of iridium and platinum shipments returned to its mundane state. She scanned the system logs. There was no record of a data corruption, no sign of intrusion. It was impossible. She dismissed it as a hallucination, a symptom of her fractured psyche. But then it happened again. Walking through a public concourse, the face of High Counselor Thrax on a towering holoscreen, assuring the public of their safety, flickered for the briefest of moments. It was replaced by the multifaceted, innocent eyes of the amethyst child, staring directly at her before the counselor's placid, lying face returned. No one else reacted. No one else seemed to see it. It was a message for an audience of one. Kaylin was not just watching, he was reaching out, testing the waters, confirming his connection. He was showing her that his influence extended far beyond the hull of his ship, that he could touch the very data streams that form the lifeblood of the Axiom. The subtlety of it was terrifying. It was a whisper in a hurricane, a single pixel of truth in a universe of lies. He was asking her a question without words. Are you brave enough to see what I am showing you? Her answer came in the form of action, a desperate gamble born of a newfound clarity. She could not live as a silent accomplice to genocide. Prefect Thorne's presence in the archives had grown more pronounced. His black-clad wardens moved through the data spires with silent efficiency, installing new security overrides and conducting integrity audits on the staff. Lyra knew she was being watched. Valerius, eager to prove his department's loyalty, had likely flagged her as an anomaly too diligent, too quiet in the face of crisis. She needed to act before Thorne's passive surveillance became an active interrogation. Her plan was simple and insane. The ghost ship had proven that the Axiom's most ancient security protocols were its greatest vulnerability. The founders, in their arrogance, had built back doors into their own systems, keys they believed only they would ever possess. Kaylin had one of those keys. Lyra theorized there must be others. She began a new search, not for buried files on the geodes, and for the architectural blueprints of the archives themselves. She cloaked her search under a mundane project, the Historical Data Pathway Redundancy Initiative, a title so bureaucratic and dull that it was sure to be ignored by Valerius. Deep within the schematics, she found it a physical data conduit, a relic from the pre-network era, decommissioned for centuries but never fully removed. It ran from a sub-basement processing node in the archives directly to an old communications relay on Viridia's northern pole, a place now used as an atmospheric monitoring station. It was a digital ghost, a dead nerve in the body of the system. It was also completely outside Thorne's modern surveillance grid. It was her only way out, the catalyst she needed. The event that would force her hand and burn her bridges came sooner than she expected. Prefect Thorne, a master of narrative warfare, decided the public needed a villain they could truly hate. One evening, as the twin suns of Viridia set, a bright, silent flash illuminated the orbital rings. A mid-sized commercial freighter, the Stardust Drifter, on a standard approach to the primary spaceport, exploded. The blast was contained by the port's energy shields, but the ship was obliterated. Within minutes, the official news feeds were flooded with fabricated evidence. A distorted audio recording, supposedly from the freighter's captain, screaming about an unprovoked attack. A forged energy signature analysis, expertly mimicking the ghost ship's unique quantum state, laid over the blast site. The headlines were stark and brutal. Ghost ship massacres innocent crew. Terror in orbit. The Axiom story had its martyrs. The public outcry was immediate and visceral. Fear turned to rage. Calls for the utter destruction of the ship echoed from every corner of the capital. Lyra watched it all unfold from her console, a cold, dead weight in her stomach. She cross-referenced the Stardust Drifters' public manifest. It was a grain hauler, crew of 12 making a routine delivery. But at a search of the restricted fleet movement logs, a privilege of her clearance, told a different story. The freighter had been empty, its crew reassigned to shore leave 3 days prior. It had been piloted by remote drone, a ghost ship of a different kind, sent on a suicide mission. Thorn hadn't just created a lie, he had sacrificed a vessel, a piece of the Axiom's own infrastructure, to sell it. This was the final push. The calculated, soulless evil of it severed the last thread of her old loyalty. That night, under the cloak of the third sleep cycle, Lyra made her move. With a stolen engineering pass and a toolkit she had no idea how to properly use, she descended into the cold, forgotten sub-basements of the archives. The air was stale, thick with the dust of centuries. She found the ancient conduit, a thick bundle of fiber optic cabling running through a rusted metal channel. She worked for hours, her knuckles raw, splicing a portable, isolated data slate into the deadline. It was a desperate, clumsy act of rebellion. She had no idea if the line was still viable, if the relay at the other end even had power. But it was her only chance. With the connection made, she uploaded the only thing she had that mattered, the raw, unedited helmet cam footage of the geode sterilization. She attached no message, no explanation. The truth had to speak for itself. She then pulled a small shielded device from her pocket, an audio resonator she had built from schematics she'd found in the ghost ship's melodic code. It was a gamble. She activated it, and it emitted a single, pure, resonant frequency. One of the core notes from the ship's lament was not a transmission. It was a ping, a single, clear note sent down a dead wire into the unknown. A question. "Did you hear me?" She severed the connection, wiped her slate, and slipped back into the sterile, ordered world above, leaving the truth to travel through the darkness. Aboard the obsidian ship, Kalen sat before his console. For 500 years, it had been a tombstone. Now, it was an anchor. A single, faint signal appeared on his display, a ghost of a whisper from a long, dead network. It wasn't a complex data packet. It was a sound, a pure, perfect echo of his own sorrow, sent back to him from the heart of the enemy's fortress. He closed his ancient eyes, and for the first time in an age he felt the resonance of an ally. The listener had not only heard his song, she had learned how to sing it back. His hand moved across the console, and the ghost ship began to change. Its silent, passive vigil was over. The lament had ended. Now, the symphony of retribution would begin. The Axiom's response to Lyra's broadcast was not the chaotic panic she had anticipated, and it was something far more terrifying, a calculated, suffocating silence. The helmet cam footage, sent down the dead nerve of the ancient conduit, did not erupt onto the public comm feeds. It simply vanished. There were no denials, though. No counter-narratives. No panicked attempts at censorship. The truth she had risked everything to release was swallowed whole by the vast, silent machinery of Prefect Thorn's internal security. It was as if she had screamed into the void, and the void had not even bothered to echo. The ghost ship, however, had heard her. The morning after her clandestine transmission, the obsidian vessel in Viridia's orbit changed its posture. The mournful, passive lament was gone. In its place, a new broadcast began. This one sharp, targeted, and brutally effective. It did not send a blanket signal across all channels. Instead, it began to systematically dismantle the Axiom's most critical infrastructure, not with weapons, but with information. Kalen had spent centuries observing, learning the intricate digital tapestry of the consortium, and now he began to pull at its threads. The first target was the Viridian Financial Exchange. Just as the morning trading bell chimed, the ghost ship broadcast a single, encrypted data packet. Instantly, the exchange's chronometers desynchronized by a mere 3 nanoseconds. To an outside observer, it was a minor glitch. To the high-frequency trading algorithms that governed the Axiom's economy, it was a cataclysm. Trillions of credits in automated trades were misplaced, rerouted, or simply erased in the blink of an eye. The market froze, then crashed. Panic, genuine and raw, erupted not from a manufactured threat in orbit, but from the sterile data hubs of the financial district. Next, the ship targeted the automated shipping network that ferried goods between the core worlds. A subtle corruption of the master navigational charts sent hundreds of colossal cargo freighters off course by a few decimal points. The network didn't collapse, but it snarled into a state of logistical gridlock that would take weeks to untangle. Shipments of vital medical supplies were delayed, energy cells were misrouted, and the delicate, just-in-time economy that was the bedrock of the Axiom's prosperity began to seize. Kalen was not waging a war of destruction. He was conducting a symphony of disruption, demonstrating that the consortium's greatest strength, its utter reliance on a flawless, interconnected system, was also its most profound weakness. Lyra watched the chaos unfold from within the suffocating confines of the archives. A prisoner in everything but name, Prefect Thorn had locked down the entire spire. No one entered or left without his direct authorization. His wardens were a constant, silent presence in the corridors, their pale, emotionless faces a constant reminder of her precarious position. She was a ghost within the machine, her access to the deeper systems revoked, her work confined to meaningless, trivial tasks under the watchful eye of a warden assigned specifically to her section. Her name was Warden Hella, a woman with eyes like chips of granite who sat at a monitoring station 10 meters from Lyra's desk and never seemed to blink. Lyra knew Thorn was playing a game with her. He could have arrested her, interrogated her, made her disappear, but he hadn't. He was keeping her close, studying her, perhaps waiting for her to make another move, to reveal the full extent of her connection to the ship. Or perhaps he was using her as bait. The thought also was a cold knot in her stomach. Thorn believed the ship had an accomplice on the inside, and by isolating Lyra, he was creating a choke point, a single, monitored node in the system. Any further communication from the ship would, in theory, have to pass through her. It was a clever trap. The pressure was immense. She felt Thorn's invisible net tightening around her with each passing hour. She had to find a way to warn Kalen, to tell him that she was compromised, that Thorn was using her to hunt him. But every terminal was monitored, every data stream filtered. Her previous conduit was undoubtedly sealed, its physical location now swarming with Thorn's agents. She was cut off, a silent partner to a phantom she could no longer speak to. Her chance, when it came, was born not of a grand plan, but of a simple, bureaucratic oversight. The archives, for all their technological sophistication, still relied on a primitive system for environmental control, a network of pneumatic tubes used to deliver physical data crystals and maintenance requests between departments. It was an archaic, inefficient system, and therefore completely beneath the notice of Thorn's digital surveillance. It was a system built of air and pressure, not light and data. Lyra spent 2 days subtly observing Warden Hella's routine. She learned the woman took precisely 7 minutes for her mid-cycle nutritional break, a window of time when she would turn her attention from the monitoring screen to her sterile nutrient paste. During that window, Lyra crafted her message. She couldn't send a file. She couldn't send a warning. She had to send a concept, a piece of information so abstract it would pass any casual inspection but would be understood by the one it was meant for. She accessed the public record of the Stardust Drifter, the freighter Thorn had sacrificed. She pulled up its official crew manifest, the 12 fabricated names of its non-existent crew, and encoded it into a simple, non-executable text file. She then embedded a single, hidden command within the file's metadata. It was a command directed at the atmospheric monitoring station at the Northern Pole, the terminus of her old conduit. The command was simple query ambient temperature. It was a benign, routine request, the kind the station's automated systems would process and discard 1,000 times a day. But to an intelligence monitoring that specific, dead location for any sign of life, a sudden, isolated query from a file associated with Thorn's most blatant lie would be a signal. It was a message composed of context, not content. It said, "The lie is the trap. They are watching the source of the truth." During Hella's break, Lyra walked calmly to the pneumatic tube station, her face a mask of professional boredom. She placed the data crystal containing the file into a canister, labeled it for the Meteorological Archives, a department so obscure it was practically mythical, and sent it on its way with a hiss of compressed air. The canister shot through the labyrinthine tubes, an analog thought in a digital world. She returned to her desk seconds before Hella looked up, her expression unchanged. Aboard his silent vessel, Kalen saw the signal. It wasn't a powerful broadcast or a clear message. It was a flicker of activity on a sensor he had left active as a memorial. A digital ghost limb, a dead relay on Viridia's northern pole. The source of the listener's first contact had momentarily activated, requesting a single, meaningless piece of atmospheric data. The request had been triggered by a file containing the falsified crew manifest of the destroyed freighter. Kalen understood instantly. The listener was telling him that the channel of truth was now a trap. Thorn was not just hunting for the source of the leak. He was actively using the truth as bait. He was a master of inversion, turning the Axiom's crime into a weapon against those who would expose it. The realization brought with it a cold, sharp clarity. His strategy of systemic disruption was working, but it was impersonal. It was hurting the Axiom, but it was also hurting the countless innocent cogs in its great machine. The freighter captains thrown off course, the banking clerks whose pensions had vanished, they were not his enemy. To win this war, he had to do more than cripple a system. He had to expose the architect of its lies. He had to make Prefect Thorn, the invisible hand of the Axiom's cruelty, visible to everyone. Kalen's response was immediate and profound. His ship, which had been methodically attacking the Axiom's logistical and financial networks, went silent. The systemic glitches stopped. The market stabilized. The shipping lanes cleared. For a full cycle, there was an unnerving calm. The Consortium Council, believing their show of force and Thorn's internal security measures had worked, began to broadcast messages of victory. They had weathered the storm. The terrorist had been intimidated into silence. It was a fatal miscalculation. Kalen had not retreated. He had simply changed his target. During that period of silence, he focused the entirety of his vessel's formidable processing power on a single objective, Prefect Thorn. He sifted through every piece of encrypted communication Thorn had ever sent, every sealed order he had ever given. He peeled back the layers of the prefect's official life and delved into the dark infrastructure he had built to maintain the Axiom's great lie. He found black sites where inconvenient historians and scientists had disappeared. He found secret accounts used to fund disinformation campaigns on a dozen worlds. He found the original, unredacted order, bearing Thorne's personal encryption key to remotely pilot the Stardust Drifter to its destruction. He gathered it all, every last piece of the prefect's secret empire of deceit, and he prepared to turn it into a weapon. Then, exactly 48 hours after its silence began, the ghost ship moved. It did not jump to slip space. It did not engage its engines. It simply descended. The black, teardrop-shaped vessel breached Viridia's upper atmosphere, its form slicing through the manufactured clouds with an eerie grace. The Viridian Defense Fleet, caught completely by surprise, scrambled to intercept, but their ship seemed to move through molasses. Kalen was manipulating localized gravity, creating a bubble of distorted space-time around his vessel that rendered their conventional propulsion systems sluggish and ineffective. The ship descended further, its destination clear. It was heading not for the Council Spire or the Monument of Concord. It was heading for the Black, Obsidian Tower of Internal Security, the fortress where Prefect Thorne reigned. And on every screen on Viridia, from the towering public holoscreens to the personal data slates of every citizen, a new broadcast began. It was not a lament. It was not a glitch. It was a face. Thorne's face, cold and impassive, taken from his own security cameras just moments before. And below it, a single line of text began to scroll, simple and damning. The Axiom is not your enemy. The lie is, and this is its architect. Then, the data began to stream. Every secret file, every illegal order, every piece of Thorne's hidden world, laid bare for the entire capital to see. The war for the truth had just become personal. The public broadcast of Prefect Thorne's private atrocities acted as a spark in a methane-rich atmosphere. The effect was not a slow burn of discontent, but a violent, instantaneous explosion of public consciousness. For 500 cycles, the citizens of the Axiom had lived in a carefully curated garden of prosperity, oblivious to the blood that fertilized its roots. Now, Kalen was showing them the gardener, and he was holding a blood-soaked spade, the footage of the Stardust Drifter being remotely targeted for destruction, complete with Thorne's cold, encrypted authorization, was the most damning. The 12 names on the fabricated crew manifest. Names that had been eulogized as martyrs were now symbols of a chillingly cynical deception. The faces of the disappeared historians and scientists, their files marked archived by Thorne's own hand, flickered across the screens, their silent testimonies more powerful than any speech. The entire narrative of the benevolent Axiom, the paternalistic protector, shattered in a single, sustained broadcast. Riots erupted spontaneously across Viridia, on the disorganized brawls of a rabble, on the focused, incandescent rage of a people who had just discovered the profoundest betrayal. They turned their fury not on each other, but on the symbols of the power that had lied to them. Golden statues of the founders were torn down in the plazas. The entrances to the financial exchanges were blockaded by furious merchants who now understood their losses were the result of a manufactured crisis. Most significantly, a massive, void-swelling crowd began to march toward the internal security tower, their individual voices merging into a single, deafening roar for justice. Prefect Thorne, watching the city burn from his penthouse office, did not panic. Panic was a luxury for the unprepared. He had spent his life anticipating this very moment, the inevitable day when the truth would try to claw its way out of its grave. His response was as swift as it was brutal. He declared martial law, citing the ongoing terrorist threat of the ghost ship as justification. His black-clad wardens, who had until now been a force of subtle intimidation, emerged onto the streets in full riot gear, their sleek, faceless helmets a stark contrast to the contorted, emotional faces of the protesters. They moved with terrifying efficiency, deploying sonic suppressors and neural stun fields to disperse the crowds. The pristine avenues of Viridia, which had never known violence, became a war zone. The sounds of peaceful commerce were replaced by the shriek of crowd control weapons and the defiant shouts of the citizenry. The lie, when cornered, had bared its teeth. Inside the archives, the lockdown became absolute. The building's blast shields descended with a percussive boom, sealing Lyra and the other archivists inside what had now become a gilded tomb. The external feeds were cut, replaced by a looped message from High Counselor Thrax, his face a mask of strained calm, assuring them that the destabilization event was under control. But Lyra could feel the tremors of the riots through the soles of her feet, a deep, rhythmic vibration that was the heartbeat of a revolution. Her warden, Hela, stood by the sealed exit, her impassive stance unchanged. But Lyra could see a new tension in the woman's shoulders, a flicker of uncertainty in her otherwise placid gaze. Even the most loyal instruments of the state were being shaken by the scale of the public's fury. Lyra knew her role in this was far from over. Kaelin had exposed the disease. Now, someone had to provide the cure. The undeniable proof that would not only incriminate Thorn, but would dismantle the very foundation of the Axiom's historical lie. Thorn's crimes were a symptom. The geogenocide was the source of the sickness. She had the proof, the original helmet cam footage, but it was trapped with her inside this fortress. Useless. She needed a way to broadcast it, to bypass Thorn's information blockade and deliver the final, killing blow to the official narrative. Her gaze fell again upon the pneumatic tube system, her one proven lifeline. It was a pathetic, antiquated tool, but it was her only hope. She needed to get the data crystal with the footage to a place where it could be broadcast. The only terminal outside the archives she knew of was the Northern Relay. But how could she get there? And even if she could get the crystal out of the building, who would receive it? The system required a destination, a specific departmental address. Her mind raced, sifting through the arcane. Forgotten corners of the archival index she had memorized over years of diligent work. And then she found it. A ghost department. A bureaucratic fiction created in the early days of the Axiom and never formally dissolved. It was called the Office of Historical Reconciliation, a department with no staff, no budget, and no physical location, save for a single long-forgotten pneumatic receiving station located in the maintenance sublevel of the Monument of Concord, the very spire that celebrated the lie she sought to destroy. It was a desperate, almost poetic longshot. The ghost ship hung motionless over Thorn's tower, its broadcast of his crimes playing on a relentless loop. It was a silent, imposing witness to the chaos it had unleashed. The Viridian Defense Fleet, their ships still sluggish in the localized gravity well, could only maintain a useless perimeter. Kaelin's objective was not to fight them. His role was to act as a colossal magnifying glass, focusing the rage of the populace onto its true source. But he was also watching, listening, waiting for the listener's next move. He had seen the archives go into full lockdown. He knew she was trapped. He maintained his vigil, his faith in her a quiet, unwavering hum beneath the symphony of planetary chaos. He had planted the seed. He had to trust that she would know how to make it bloom. Lyra's plan required a diversion. She couldn't just walk to the pneumatic station with Hela watching her every move. She needed to create a crisis within the archives, a fire that would draw the attention of the guards and give her the window she needed. Her eyes fell on the spire's emergency power grid schematics, which, as a junior chronologist, she had no business accessing. But in the chaos, with the building's internal systems on high alert, a low-level query about power consumption protocols wouldn't raise any flags. She found a critical junction in the sub-basement where a primary power conduit ran alongside a high-pressure water coolant pipe, and a carefully timed power surge, rerouted through a secondary system, would overload the conduit. The resulting explosion wouldn't be catastrophic, but it would be spectacular. It would rupture the coolant pipe, flooding the sublevel with high-pressure steam and triggering every emergency protocol in the building. It was incredibly risky. Sabotage of Axiom infrastructure was a capital offense. But her old life was already forfeit. Arezi initiated the command, and her fingers steady, and he set a 5-minute delay, just enough time to get into position. Then she stood up from her desk and began walking calmly toward the pneumatic station. "My station requires a hard copy requisition from Central Processing," she said to Hela, her voice level. "Director Valerius is insistent on maintaining physical protocols during the communications blackout." Hela's eyes narrowed. It was a plausible, if trivial, request. "I will accompany you," the warden stated, her voice flat. "Of course," Lyra replied, her heart hammering against her ribs as they walked through the silent marble corridors. A deep, shuddering boom echoed from below. The lights flickered violently, then switched to the dim red glow of the emergency system. Alarms blared, loud and insistent. A voice from the building's intercom announced, "Emergency alert! Coolant breach in sub-level 4. All security personnel report to Sector Gamma." Hela froze, her hand instinctively going to the sidearm at her hip. Her duty was to guard Lyra, but the building's integrity was her primary responsibility. She was torn. Lyra seized the moment. "The steam could destabilize the data cores," she exclaimed, her voice filled with a convincing, manufactured panic. "My life's work is in there." The appeal to a shared sense of duty, to the sanctity of the archives, was the final push. "Stay here," Hela commanded, her training overriding her suspicion. She turned and ran toward the nearest service lift, her footsteps echoing down the corridor. Lyra didn't hesitate. She sprinted to the pneumatic station, the data crystal clutched in her hand. She slammed it into a canister, addressed it to the phantom Office of Historical Reconciliation, and shoved it into the tube with a deafening hiss. The truth of the geo-genocide was on its way. A physical object traveling through the bones of a dying empire. She had done it, but as she leaned against the wall, gasping for breath, a cold voice spoke from the shadows behind her. "An elegant deception, junior chronologist." Director Valerius stepped into the red emergency light, his face a mixture of fear and vindictive triumph. In his hand, he held a small bassinet personal comm device, its screen glowing. "Prefect Thorne will be very interested to know that our little traitor is not only a collaborator, but a saboteur as well." He had been watching her the whole time, a snake in the grass waiting for his moment to strike. He raised the comm device, his finger hovering over the button that would seal her fate. The canister shot through the pneumatic network, a tiny metal bullet carrying the weight of history. It traveled through ducts that ran alongside panicked wardens and oblivious archivists, a secret message passing through the chaos. It arrived at the Monument of Concord with a soft thud, dropping into a dusty, forgotten receiving bin in a dark, silent maintenance closet. And there it sat, a truth delivered to an empty room. But Kaylin was no longer just watching. The moment Lyra initiated the power surge, he had detected the anomalous energy fluctuation within the archives. It was a small signal, but it was deliberate, a deviation from the building's normal rhythm. It was a sign. He focused his ship's sensors, pushing them to their absolute limit, and followed the faintest of vibrations traveling through the ground from the archives, the low-frequency hum of the pneumatic tube system. He tracked the canister's journey, a whisper of movement through the heart of the city, until it came to a stop at the base of the monument. He now knew the location of the package, but he was still in orbit, and the monument was on the ground, surrounded by a city at war with itself. He couldn't retrieve it. Not alone. He needed a hand on the ground. And so, he turned his attention from the macro to the micro. He scanned the chaotic comm chatter of the rioters, the frantic orders of the wardens, searching for a single, specific voice. He was searching for a pilot. He found her in the choked skies above the commercial district. Her name was Jax, a former cargo hauler whose ship had been grounded by the financial collapse. She was now flying a battered, heavily modified atmospheric skimmer, acting as a spotter for the protesters, warning them of warden movements from above. Her piloting was reckless, desperate, and brilliant. Kaylin opened a secure, untraceable channel directly to her skimmer's navigation system. Her console flickered, and a single, calm, resonant voice filled her cockpit. A voice that was not human, but felt ancient and strangely reassuring. "Jax," the voice said, using her name without introduction. "You are a very skilled pilot. I have a package that needs to be picked up. If you retrieve it, you will not just be helping a protest. You will be ending a war." Before she could respond, a set of precise coordinates appeared on her navigation display, pointing to a maintenance entrance at the base of the Monument of Concord. It was a delivery request from a ghost, a mission from a god in the machine. And as she banked her skimmer hard, evading a burst of sonic fire from a warden patrol, she grinned. For the first time since the crisis began, this was a job that made sense. The revolution now had its courier. The red emergency light painted Director Valerius as a demon from a forgotten myth, his face a grotesque mask of petty triumph. Lyra's blood ran cold, her brief moment of victory turning to ash in her mouth. She was caught, her desperate gambit exposed by the one man whose ambition was exceeded only by his cowardice. "All your cleverness, junior chronologist," Valerius sneered, his voice thin and reedy. "You forgot about the rats in the walls." He was savoring the moment, prolonging the kill. That was his mistake. As his finger moved to activate the comm, a heavy, armored boot slammed into the side of his head with brutal, efficient force. Valerius crumpled to the floor in a heap, the comm device skittering across the marble. Warden Hella stood over him, her face no longer an impassive mask, but a canvas of conflicted fury. She had seen him, heard his triumphant boast. She had seen a high-ranking director threatening an unarmed scholar in the middle of a crisis he had done nothing to solve. "The emergency is in the sublevel. Director," she said to his unconscious form, her voice laced with a contempt that had been simmering for years. She looked at Lyra Yates, her granite eyes holding not accusation, but a question. "The coolant breach," Lyra said, her voice shaking but steady. "I had to create a diversion." Hella nodded slowly, the pieces clicking into place behind her eyes. She had spent a lifetime enforcing the Axiom's order, but Kaylin's broadcast had cracked the foundation of that order, and Valerius's craven betrayal had just shattered it. She kicked the comm device, crushing it under her heel. "The communication systems are down," Hella stated, her voice now a declaration. "No one can confirm who caused the breach. You have a 5-minute head start." Go. Find a hole and crawl into it. The archives are no longer safe for anyone who knows the truth. Lyra stared at her, stunned by the sudden, profound act of rebellion. Why, she whispered. Hella's gaze was hard. Because I was on security detail during the Stardust Drifter incident. My report said there were no life signs aboard before the explosion. Thorn buried it and promoted me. I took the promotion. The words were a confession and an absolution in one. Now go. Make it count. Lyra didn't need to be told twice. She fled, melting into the red-lit, chaotic corridors of the spire. A ghost leaving her own tomb behind. Jax threw her skimmer into a gut-wrenching dive, the vehicle's frame groaning in protest as she skimmed the rooftops of Iridia's financial district. Below her, the streets were a roiling sea of people and armored wardens, the pristine architecture scarred by plasma fire and the black smoke of burning barricades. The voice in her head, Kaylin's voice, was an island of impossible calm in the storm. Warden patrol converging on your left flank. Jax, increase altitude by 20 meters and vent port side thrusters. There is a gap in their sonic field coverage. She followed the instructions without question, her hands and feet moving with practiced instinct. The skimmer danced through a hail of stun bolts that would have incapacitated a less agile craft. Flying for a ghost was strange, but he was the best co-pilot she'd ever had. The monument of Concord loomed ahead, a spear of polished obsidian and gold piercing the smoke-filled sky. It was a symbol of the Axiom's victory, its peak crowned with a powerful, city-wide broadcast antenna. Now, it was her destination. Prefect Thorn has dispatched an elite warden unit to secure the monument, Kaylin's voice warned. They will be entering through the main concourse. You will not. Scanners indicate a maintenance hatch on the western face, 150 meters from the base. Jack spotted it, a tiny, almost invisible seam in the monument's polished facade. She brought the skimmer into a hovering halt, the vehicle buffeted by the chaotic winds of the riot. Nice parking spot, she muttered, grabbing a mag grapple from her toolkit. Hope the package is worth it. She fired the grapple, the magnetic head locking onto the hatch with a solid thunk, and rappelled down. A tiny figure against the colossal structure, Kaylin worked his own magic. The hatch, which hadn't been opened in a century, hissed and slid open, its internal locks overridden by a will from orbit. She slipped inside, finding herself in a dark, silent maintenance shaft. The receiving station is 30 meters below your position. Kaylin guided. Be swift. Thorn's unit has breached the lower levels. Jax descended into the monument's mechanical guts, the sounds of the city-wide battle fading to a dull, distant roar. She found the pneumatic station, a relic coated in a thick layer of dust. In its receiving bin lay a single, simple metal canister. It felt impossibly light, impossibly fragile to be the key to the entire war. She grabbed it just as she heard the clang of armored boots echoing from the stairwell below. She had the package. Now she had to deliver it. The antenna at the peak, Jack said into her comm, scrambling back up her line toward the skimmer. That's the only place with enough power to punch through Thorn's blackout. Can you get me in? There was a pause, and for the first time, she felt a sense of immense concentration from the voice. The antenna's core systems are shielded by layers of sovereign-grade encryption, Kaylin replied. It was designed to be untouchable, but the designers were arrogant. They built their locks with keys. I have had 500 years to study their work. As Jax's skimmer ascended alongside the Great Spire, panels on the monument's surface began to slide open. Defense turrets, dormant for centuries, emerged from their housing. But instead of tracking her, they swiveled and opened fire on the warden patrols in the streets below. Access panels to the spire's internal system sparked and shorted out. Kalen was not just unlocking a door, he was seizing the entire building, turning the Monument of Concord into his own personal weapon. Jax reached the summit, a windswept platform at the base of the colossal antenna, and the air crackled with raw energy. A single interface port glowed with a soft, blue light, a silent invitation from Kalen. She slammed the data crystal from the canister into the port. "The truth is delivered." Kalen's voice resonated, a new note of profound, ancient satisfaction in its tone. "Now, let it speak." The antenna, which had been broadcasting High Counselor Thrax's placating lies, fell silent. For a breathtaking second, every screen on Viridia went dark. Then, they all lit up again. Not with a face, but with a view. The grainy, chaotic perspective of a Consortium Marine's helmet cam. They showed the city of singing crystals. They showed the pleas of the geodes. They showed the plasma fire turning living beings to dust. They showed the amethyst child being torn from its parent. The broadcast was silent, without narration or commentary. None was needed. The raw, unfiltered truth of the Axiom's birth was projected onto every screen, every building, and against the clouds themselves by the monument's own holographic emitters. The entire sky above Viridia became a screen, forcing a whole civilization to witness the sin upon which it was built. The roar of the riot died down, replaced by a vast, collective gasp of horror and recognition. The wardens in the streets faltered, their stun batons lowering as they looked up at the sky-sized atrocity. They were not defending an idea anymore. They were defending a crime. The wave of public fury, which had been a chaotic force, now coalesced into a single, focused, unstoppable tsunami of unified rage, and it turned as one. Toward the last bastion of the lie, the Black Tower of Internal Security. Prefect Thorne stood at the panoramic window of his office, watching the end of his world. The helmet cam footage played out on the side of a building across the plaza. A silent, flickering ghost of a past he had dedicated his life to burying. He could hear the change in the battle below. The disciplined volleys of his wardens had dissolved into sporadic, panicked shots. The roar of the crowd was no longer just rage. It was conviction. He saw a squad of his own wardens, their black armor unmistakable, turn and fire not on the protesters, but on a fellow unit that was still trying to hold the line. The system was eating itself alive. His private comm chimed. It was the captain of the Viridian fleet. "Prefect Thorne, the vessel. It has taken control of the entire orbital defense grid. We are locked out. It is disarming us." Thorne ended the call without a word. He had been outmaneuvered at every turn by an enemy he couldn't see, an enemy who wielded the truth like a surgical weapon. He had built an empire of control, but he had forgotten that the most powerful force in the galaxy was not fear, but memory. A tremendous, grinding boom echoed from the lobby of his tower. The crowd had breached the blast doors. He did not reach for a weapon. He did not try to flee. He simply stood and watched the city he had ruled with an iron fist turn against him. His reflection in the glass, alone, stoic figure against a backdrop of fire and revelation. The lie was dead. There was nothing left to defend. Far above, the obsidian teardrop of the ghost ship hung in the sky. Its work was done. As the first rays of Viridia's twin suns broke over the horizon, bathing the scarred but awakened city in a new light, the ship began to fade, not with a flash of engines, but by slowly becoming transparent, a memory dissolving back into the void. Kalen's long vigil was over. His final transmission was not to the planet, but a single private whisper to Jax's skimmer and to a stolen data slate in a hidden alley where Lyra was watching the dawn. You are the listeners now. Remember us. Remember the truth. The Axiom did not survive, but Viridia did. In the weeks that followed, a provisional government rose from the ashes. Its first act, the formal dissolution of the old consortium and the establishment of a new covenant based not on commerce, but on transparency. The Office of Historical Reconciliation was officially chartered. Its first director, a quiet, determined woman named Lyra, who began the monumental task of rebuilding a galaxy's memory, one unearthed truth at a time. Jax was given a new ship, the Echo, and she spent her days charting the silent, quarantined geode systems, searching for survivors, for any sign that Kalen's people might one day return. And the monument of Concord, the spire that had celebrated a lie, was left standing, its antenna forever dark, a silent, colossal tombstone reminding all who saw it that silence is the most dangerous lie of all, and that a single voice armed with the truth can be enough to wake the dead and tear down an empire.